Well, this programme has seen a letter about the Ukip leader Nigel Farage during his days as a pupil at the exclusive Dulwich College from teachers accusing him of racist and fascist behaviour. Some members of staff expressed their concern after the teenage Farage was appointed a prefect, including a claim that he marched through a village late at night singing Hitler Youth songs. Well, we'll hear from the Ukip leader's response in a moment, but after this report from our political correspondent, Michael Crick.
As a teenager in the late 70s and early 80s, Nigel Farage went to Dulwich College in South London, one of Britain's top private schools. It was a time of huge tensions over racial matters, especially locally. The extreme right-wing party, the National Front, held regular marches, such as this one in Lewisham, which saw violent clashes. And during the famous 1981 Brixton riots not far away, the police actually borrowed the college grounds as a base. Less than 8 weeks after the riots, the 17-year-old Farage was made a college prefect, much to the disgust of many staff. In his memoirs, Farage says teachers were hostile as they particularly deplored his spirited defence of Enoch Powell, the former Conservative politician who'd long warned about wide-scale immigration.
I recant nothing, and I expect others to recant nothing.
When he came here, he was 10 years old.
Terry Walsh, who's still in touch with Farage, was deputy master at that time, the deputy head. And he agrees some Dulwich colleagues weren't keen on the future Ukip leader.
That is probably a reflection on the staff rather than a reflection on him, because, you see, he was here at the time when, like most schools, there was quite a strong left-wing element among the staff and so on, you know. But yes, I think that's where he might have found opposition, in that he was a believer in discipline and order and so on.
Channel 4 News has found good evidence that teachers' objections here to Farage becoming a prefect were a lot stronger than him simply regarding Enoch Powell as his great hero. In what was clearly an extremely fraught meeting to discuss that year's batch of prefects, in discussing him, teachers use words like racist, fascist and neo-fascist. We travelled down to South Devon to talk to Bob Jope, a former English teacher who taught Farage. He vividly remembers the lively debate on new prefects that year.
I must have attended half a dozen of these meetings in the years I was at the college, but this one stood out because the meeting became enormously heated, in that a significant number of staff, and young and old from various departments, expressed concern at Nigel Farage being made a prefect.
What were they saying about him?
To some extent, you might say the accusation from some staff was that Nigel had voiced views that were not simply right-wing, because then no one's going to object to a particular place on the spectrum, but views that were quite clearly racist, and those racist views were considered, again, by the staff who had heard them, some at first hand, some had heard about them, were considered to be not the views, again, that a school should tolerate.
It's 32 years ago, but in his desk, Bob Jope has evidence. A letter written by a colleague, Chloe Deakin, to the head, the master, summarising staff concerns about Farage. Jope often used the letter in English lessons in later years, with names blacked out, as an example of clear, powerful writing.
You will recall that at the recent and lengthy meeting about the selection of prefects, the remark by a colleague that Farage was a fascist, but that was no reason why he'd not make a good prefect, invoked considerable reaction from members of the Common Room.
Chloe Deakin's letter continues.
Another colleague who teaches the boy described his publicly professed racist and neo-fascist views, and he cited a particular incident in which Farage was so offensive to a boy in his set that he had to be removed from the lesson. This master stated his view that that behaviour was precisely why the boy should not be made a prefect.
Bob Jope takes up the reading.
Yet another colleague described how at a CCF camp, that's the cadet corps at the college, Farage and others had marched through a quiet Sussex village very late at night shouting Hitler youth songs. When it was suggested by another teacher that boys who express such views don't really mean them, the college chaplain himself commented that, on the contrary, in his experience, views of that kind expressed by boys of that age are deep-seated, and here she's underlined, and are meant.
Terry Walsh says this was all Farage's habit of winding people up.
Some of the former boys and teachers also say he was, he was more extreme than that at times, that he would express support for the British movement or the National Front. Do you recall that?
I think at times he adopted a sort of facade on that one. If you think I'm that sort of chap, then I am that sort of chap, and so on. But I don't think he ever believed it. He was much too caring and considerate of other people.
So you think it was, if he did do that, it was all a bit of a joke?
Absolutely, yes, and I said so at the time.
So he did do that, did he? He did express support for groups like that?
Oh, I think so, yes, among his contemporaries and so on and so on. And probably to some members of staff, because he knew it would rile them.
And do you think some staff didn't think it was a joke?
Or they didn't want to think it was a joke and so on. I mean, like a lot of those people, they didn't have a great sense of humour. I mean, you can't deal with the Farages of this world unless you've got a sense of humour, or a sense of the ridiculous.
But Bob Jope says some of the things Farage said and did can't have been simply provocative.
For example, the bizarre reference to Hitler youth songs marching through quiet Sussex villages. I'm not quite sure how that's going to tease or torment a teacher back in Dulwich. I mean, if you're performing in that way beyond the confines of the staff you want to torment, it would imply that there's more to it than simply a bit of fun.
The master of Dulwich dismissed the worries and protests and stuck by his decision to appoint Farage. It was naughtiness, not racism, David Ems has told me. I didn't probe too closely into that naughtiness, he says, but the staff were fed up of his cheekiness and rudeness. They wanted to expel him. But I saw potential in him, made him a prefect, and, he says, I was proved right. But there are several old boys of Dulwich who've also told us they recall Farage making racist remarks at school or expressing support for groups on the far right, though none of these boys will appear on camera. Others, though, merely recall that his views were Thatcherite. Some will say it's irrelevant what a teenager did at school more than 30 years ago, but Ukip has faced charges that some of its people are racist. Tomorrow, the party opens its annual conference at Central Hall, Westminster, aiming for the remarkable goal of topping the polls in next year's European elections.